Dynasty and Chill. We're live at the Expo talking preseason, and it's not going to be...
No, we're breaking preseason news. Did you hear CJ Stroud look bad in his rookie debut in preseason? You're selling him now, right?
It means his career is over. And on the contrary, it means that Tank Dell is now at least a wide receiver 2.
Tank Dell, and I'll say this. So we have Dynasty and Trade 5 listener leagues, and there's someone in that league that has Tank Dell. And they started talking about how Tank Dell has just as good of a chance as Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, and Zay Flowers to hit this year off of one good preseason game. Does that seem right to you?
It doesn't. Well, maybe it does. I don't know. And that's what this discussion is going to be about. It's going to be about how to play preseason hype against your league mates in your league, reacting to the right kind of news, doing the right things with the news. And it probably starts with following Twitter, following podcasts, anywhere where they're actually reporting what's going on in the preseason, and more importantly, overreacting in real time. So let's just start there. I'm going to pose this question to Shane. Shane, we get through a first weekend of preseason. First weekend of preseason is done. We've seen every team in action. We've seen a lot of players that are, and this is why it breeds the topic at hand. It's because most of the players that are already valuable either play very little or they don't play at all. So nobody that actually has any real value is really moving much. So it's almost a double-edged sword because you have people that are not valuable to begin with that are creating value just based on meaningless games where they're playing against players that are far inferior than they're probably ever going to need to play against to produce. So
they're even inferior players, but they're playing against more inferior. So inferiorist players.
Well, the point of this is that it is putting players that have no value in the spotlight. There's nothing else to talk about. Everybody out there has been starving for any sort of football. So we have a week of football. Every team played. There's narratives, there's storylines, all of that coming out of training camp. But instead of taking, like during the season, when the real games start, players that matter will start to play. And we see where week to week we react to this player had a lot of targets. This player didn't play a lot. Okay, let's move their dynasty value probably too far down or too far up based on a small sample size. Here, it's the same thing, but it's A, preseason where the games don't matter, but it's B, all the players that already are kind of irrelevant are in the spotlight. So immediately we need something to talk about as content creators. And so names like Tank Dell and all these other names coming out from
Ty Chandler.
Ty Chandler's another one. There's many that are going to be brought up of, okay, this means something now. This tells us something that's going to happen in the regular season. So when you finish a week of preseason, you see the stats, you see what's trending on Twitter. You could probably say which players, oh man, if I have one of those, I'm going to go see if I can sell. How do you digest that? And then how do you go act? Where do you start?
So for my own personal value of the players, I don't care. This isn't making anyone's value improve. Obviously, what I'm going to try to do is use it like I was discussing Dynasty Trades in 5. We got a dude in our league telling us that Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, all in the same bucket now. They're all in the same bucket. Never mind the fact that 3 of those guys I named have first-round draft capital, which means something. And Tank Dell has
third round draft capital,
and Tank Dell is 5 foot
5'8", 165.
Yeah, so
I am bigger than him.
Okay,
which is very few players in the NFL that I am bigger.
You are
than.
small, so I got to meet you in person a couple times. I forgot how short you are. You are stocky, but yeah, you would kill Tank Dell.
I think I am officially like 5'7", 175. Yeah. So I am not as athletic. That's for sure. The point is, he is actually, if he stood next to us, we'd be like, oh yeah, kind of the same size. Yet he's out there playing against monsters.
Right. So Tank Dell specific, and I know, look, I don't want to beat Tank Dell to a pulp because I know we did that with Dalton Kincaid a couple of weeks ago. So we'll just use player X's name. Player X blows up, but like you said, target share doesn't matter in these situations. Target share matters during the regular season because it's a real game. Opportunities almost don't matter in these games because, again, it's not a regular game. And a lot of time what these coaches are doing is just practicing specific plays. Personally, the value that they derive or that they gain to me is nothing. But I am going to try to sell on the hype because, there's content creators out there and fans that are just thirsty. They haven't done anything in fantasy football, I guess. They're not degenerates like us. Like, they don't turn it off. But now all of a sudden they got this hot piece of action. Thought I was going to curse there and I didn't. They have this hot piece of ass in Tank Dell and they want to sell it, or they think, all right, well, I have CJ Stroud. Maybe I should go buy Tank Dell. So they'll go, hey, I'll offer a second. What's a second worth? Who cares, dude? Tank Dell's upside, wide receiver 2, right? Could be a wide receiver too, in theory, if you close your eyes just right, just squint correctly. I don't believe that, by the way. I'm paraphrasing people's heads, minds, thoughts, whatever. So a lot of people look at that and they go, oh, well, it's just a second. What does that matter? Well, you know what that matters? In week 9, when you're down a running back, you're down actually a wide receiver that is good still in the regular season, like Amari Cooper. You won't be able to use that. It's all about the opportunity cost. Like, that's the one thing I keep coming back to in fantasy football, dynasty football, is the opportunity cost. It seems magnified to me now. If you're going to spend that now on that type of player, you can only do that a finite amount of times anyway. Now, it's one thing if you're a portfolio player, right? And I wouldn't even give them a pass on it. But if they were like, I want some exposure, so I'm going to trade for 2 Tank Dells out of my 20 leagues. Sure. You want them on 10% of your rosters, whatever. Does that math work out? Good job. If I want them on 10% of my rosters, sure. I won't be happy with it, but it's not my team. But if you want to do that because you're a portfolio player and you want to add a little Tank Dell exposure, sure. It shouldn't be more than 2/3. Like that's the line. Like, you should go, you know what? This just made me add another third to Tank Dell. And if you do have Tank Dell or whoever, anyone else that pops off in the next couple of weeks, Ty Chandler, like we just said, you're doing yourself a disservice if you haven't spammed your league with him for a second. Everybody in the league, even Scott. Scott's going to turn it down, but just send it anyway. You never know.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway here is I'm using the preseason as a mechanism to move players that before they had no value. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, that guy was worth a third, but there's a big difference between a player that's actually worth a third
and you can get
in your mind versus a player you can actually go out and sell for a third. Because generally a player that you're willing to roster on your team, you're going to say, well, that's worth a third, because anything less, barely worth a roster spot, not worth a roster spot. A lot of times a player for a fourth, I use the fourth as a barometer. If I can't get a fourth for a player in a league, I probably should question whether I'm using that roster spot on the best player. Is there someone else on waivers that literally could be the same exact thing? Then I'm looking at, okay, what is the mechanism to where if there's any positive news, a good game, a big play, some sort of puff piece or trending moment to where if that happens, so not it may happen, if it happens, is there a path for the third to exist? And I think that is the key with using this preseason news, as there is a mechanism for players that had no value. And when I say no value, no real demand on the market, to where you can put them on the block and someone will say, I will give you a third. I will give you 2/3. I will give you even a second. I will give you 2/4. I will give you fab dollars. That scale, that range is all different depending on your format, number of teams, number of roster spots, all that kind of stuff. But the idea being it creates demand for players where it didn't exist before. I think that's how you take advantage of this news. And this is my next point, Shane, is what's gone, I think, for at least for me and generally most of the leagues that I play in, the idea of selling a player at a profit doesn't exist anymore. What does exist is selling the player to somebody as a throw-in in a deal, but also selling the player at all. That's what you're looking for here, is it goes from you couldn't sell him, even though someone out there, as soon as you pick him or as soon as you drop him, someone else would have picked him up. But in terms of them giving you any sort of asset to where they know you can just go pick somebody else up, it's like giving you free money because you're going to go replace Ty Chandler with another running back. And it's like, I just gave Shane a free running back and I gave him a free 3rd round pick. That's not good process on my end. So I think it creates this very small window where you can actually turn a player from nothing into there's demand on the open market. Now, the key is, what do those type of deals look like? Because I think if you try to sell for a profit, oh man, Tank Dell, he was worth a third before. I took him at the 309. He has a big preseason game. Now I want a second. To me, that's never going to work. The way to actually take advantage of this is, all right, I took him with the 309, Shane. I remember in my draft, I tried to trade out of that 309 for a future third and nobody was willing to do it. So the league already spoke one time. Yeah, Tank Dell isn't worth trading into the draft for. 2, I probably had him on my trade block for a third all summer. No one wanted any part of that action until they saw him in action. Then he goes out, looks okay, has a good game, and more importantly, just had a couple highlight plays where people go, hey, this guy, if CJ Stroud's good, Tank Dell's going to be good. I can see him being a productive slot receiver. Let me try to get a second. Then you go try to get a second. All this content out there is focusing on Tank Dell's not really a good profile that I want to bet on. He's almost 24 years old. He was a 4-year college player. He's small. He's not that fast for being small.
But real quick, here's the problem with that, right? You assume everyone is absorbing and reading or listening to
that's true.
good reason based. That's not right, because what's on Twitter, what gets you more views, more clicks on X, is if you put out a list that says these hot 5 players are going to win you your league next year, or hey guys, Tank Dell's still worth a 3rd round pick. That is one of the most unsexiest things you can send out. Any player, hey, this player X is still worth a 3rd. So a lot of that content still gets absorbed and gets digested by people that we play with. Like I said, I'll still try to sell for a second. I'm practical enough to know that that's probably not going to work. But I'm going to put in the legwork first and say, all right, well, everyone needs to reject it first. And then after that, yeah, let me do it for a 3rd. Now, let me ask you this. Is Tank Dell a player that maybe we're too short-sighted on? Another preseason week, he goes off. Could he then be worth a 2nd? When is the absolute get-out point? Or is it right now? And this is, again, not specific to Tank Dell, any player in this situation.
So basically what you're saying is he goes out and he has a great preseason overall, right, and everyone's excited for him. Yeah, you know what? That can happen. I think that's few and far between, though, because I think you're going to see different players. The thing is basically the Tank Dell, CJ Stroud, and it's the opposite. Everyone actually hating on CJ Stroud, saying he's not going to be good, as Shane changes our sign to oh, you missed me already, Shane. The point is, with Tank Dell, if you're going to bet that he's going to have a great preseason, then yeah, he's probably worth a 2nd. But I think the idea is don't get greedy. Do what Shane is saying. Go try to sell at what you think the profit price is.
Right.
The profit price is the 2nd. But don't stop at the 2nd, because here's the bad analysis that I personally hear sometimes. Okay, I had Tank Dell on the block for a 3rd. No one would buy him. I had Ty Chandler on the block for a 3rd. No one would buy him. What triggered them to then want to buy at the old price was the game.
Right.
So now you probably have people, 10% of people were on Ty Chandler, let's say, would have bought for a 3rd because they like Ty Chandler. They had a process. Okay. Personally, I like Ty Chandler. I wouldn't pay a 3rd for him when there's 50 other running backs during the summer that are the same thing. But as some of those other running backs weed themselves out, if he emerges, then I would go, hey, yeah, I'll buy that guy for a 3rd. Now, the problem is, as soon as he goes out and looks good for 2 straight games and their backfield looks like what it is, people are going to go, yeah, man, he's probably worth a 3rd. So the ability to buy for a 3rd is going to go down, but you're going to want to now buy for a 3rd. Right. So you want to take advantage of that last part. Somebody now wants to buy where they didn't before. So sure, ask for the 2nd. It's going to get rejected. Then you move to the, can I get 2/3? Well, not 2/3 because 2 common excuses. A, I don't want to pay my dues 2 years out. B, I don't even have 2/3. Right. I can only trade 1 year out if you're not playing on Sleeper, which you can trade, into infinity.
2029.
But if you have a league where you can only trade 1 year picks, you might not even have 2/3. You could say auto accept price 2/3. Well, Scott, I don't have 2/3. Okay, well, what are you willing to put in place? Because now you don't want to give a 2nd. You don't want to accept a 3rd, or you don't want to give up a 3rd. No, I have that backwards. You don't want to give a 2nd.
Right.
You want to give a 3rd. The price is somewhere in the middle. How do you compromise? So that's where you go, okay, are you willing to give up your future pick for that's a 3rd next year? Nah, don't want to pay the dues, or I just can't. We're not allowed to trade them, okay? Are you willing to give me another running back? That's when we're getting into the leverage trade. Hey, Shane, how about I give you this running back that hasn't played in the preseason and a 3rd, and you give me Ty Chandler? And you look at the 2 running backs and you go, Isaiah Spiller, Ty Chandler, give me the 3rd and the other guy, right? Or this is the one you like, which I'm not as good as doing this. I'll give you a 3rd and Ty Chandler for a 2nd. Now, why do you like doing that? Because to me, I struggle with those deals because that is an anti-leverage deal. Even though I'm getting the best piece, I'm giving up 2 pieces. Yeah. But why do you're much more aggressive with add a 3rd to get a 2nd, add a 4th to a player to get a 3rd. Like, you're much more aggressive on doing that. Explain why.
As long as you're always tearing up at that specific asset, especially pick-wise, it's a profit. I don't care that I'm giving up a player and a 3rd and getting a 2nd, because the 2nd is more valuable than either of those things put together. Regardless of what a trade calculator says, what you say when we agree to the trade, like to you, you're like, it's fair. To me, I'm like, no, you just lost, because then what else can I do with the 2nd? Now,
that's the key. Why would I justify the 2nd? What am I telling myself in the head? Oh man, that's going to be the 210.
Yeah.
And Shane's giving me the 302.
Right. But again, the beautiful thing about picks, especially 2 years out, it's all a magic box. It's the 201. It's the 202. But I can add to that 2nd a lot easier than and move and go get a good player or a better asset a lot easier than I can go, all right, well, I'll give you Ty Chandler, a 3rd round pick, and you give me Amari Cooper. Okay, I'm just buying production in season. No one in their right mind is going to do that. If I go to them, here's a 2nd rounder for Amari Cooper. How's about that? Your team's not great. He's 30 years old. You're more likely to be able to pull that off than the combination of what got you that more highly perceived asset.
Now, do you do this in circumstances where you are also not going to be wanting to use that second? Like in the case where, let's say you bank the second, but your team ends up not being good, and that second is a pick where you're going, man, I wouldn't hate having that second as we get closer to the draft. But then there could also do a deal where you go the other way, right? You now have a second, you're sitting on Tyler Lockett, and you send it to the guy that's almost guaranteed to make the Final Four.
Right.
You still added a 206 and Tyler Lockett for a 110, and you would still do that, right?
All day, every day. And you always do that. I mean, that seems like one of the simplest. That's how you say the word,
yes.
Even though I can't actually speak it. That seems like one of the simplest, easiest moves in Dynasty football. And it's something that you should be always trying to do.